But we need to do a little bit more in Africa. But that bridge can be met by using highly skilled local labor who can be trained and can be technically competent to produce these therapies at the hospitals where the patients come from care.
Welcome to Global Dispatches, a podcast for the foreign policy and global development communities and anyone who wants a deeper understanding of what is driving events in the world today. I'm your host, Mark Leon Goldberg. I am a veteran international affairs journalist and the editor of UN Dispatch. Enjoy the show. Gene therapy is effective against many diseases and even has the potential to take on some enduring global health challenges like HIV. But gene therapy as it currently exists is astronomically expensive to develop and administer. What's more, the burden of diseases that may be most susceptible to gene therapy, for example, sickle cell and potentially HIV, are most concentrated in the developing world in general and sub-Saharan Africa in particular. My guest today, Dr. Boro Dropulic, is working to close that gap and bring these advanced therapies to places where they are needed the most. He is the executive director of Caring Cross, a nonprofit dedicated to both developing advanced medical cures and making them widely accessible. In our conversation, he explains why these gene therapies are so expensive today and how to make them affordable for health systems in the developing world. So just a couple quick notes. If you are listening to this contemporaneously, I will be in Geneva the week of September 9th. I'm doing a live taping of this podcast at the World Trade Organization's Public Forum. Really looking forward to that. If you are in and around Geneva and want to meet up, just hit me up using the contact button on globaldispatches.org, and I'd love to try to get together. And lastly, we are gearing up for UNGA, my favorite time of year. Stay tuned for some announcements, and if you are a subscriber to the Global Dispatches newsletter, you will have received my personal UNGA preview. If you'd like to access that, go to globaldispatches.org and sign up for the newsletter. In that edition, I outlined some of the stories I'm planning on covering for UNGA, went through a day-by-day calendar of events in New York for High Level Week, and offered some of my own musings about what makes this UNGA so unique. Again, go to globaldispatches.org to access that article. Now here is my conversation with Dr. Boro Dropulic, Executive Director of Caring Cross. Thanks so much for speaking with me. I always like having these solutions-focused conversations. I want to kick off by having you explain in layperson's terms just what is gene therapy.
Gene therapy is using genes to help treat and potentially cure people with disease. These genes are delivered to patient cells using vectors, delivery systems, which then reprograms the cells to have a therapeutic effect. For example, in genetic disease, the mutant gene is replaced with a normally functioning gene, while for cancer, immune cells are reprogrammed with genes so that they can more effectively attack and kill cancer cells. That's just two examples.
And generally, how is it used these days in wealthier countries? How does one get gene therapy?
So, for example, one form of gene therapy is CAR T-cell therapy, where the patients come into a hospital, undergo a procedure called apheresis, which isolates their blood, and then those cells are sent to a central factory, a manufacturing facility, where the cells are processed, the vector is added, they are modified, and then they're sent back to the hospital for infusion to the patient. And these CAR T cell therapies can be life-saving in certain circumstances. So they're very effective. But this centralized model is very expensive, where you're taking cells, shipping them to a central facility, and then shipping them back. Very expensive to set up and to maintain. And so what we're proposing is a different kind of solution where the cells are manufactured locally at the hospital. And this could reduce the cost by tenfold.
Well, what is that cost in wealthier countries? Is there like an average cost? I mean, like, look, I know here in the United States, we have like runaway healthcare costs. That's not necessarily the case in other advanced democracies or advanced economies. What are we talking about in terms of like how much in sort of normal circumstances, this kind of centralized process that you describe costs?
CAR T cell therapies can be 370,000, 470,000, and some stem cell gene therapies can be greater than even $3 million. So they're hugely expensive. That's just the price for the therapy itself, not the patient care. So they're extremely expensive and certainly not broadly affordable and accessible. And it results in delays in terms of access because of such a high price.
So one of the challenges, as I understand it, is that many of the diseases that might be susceptible to this kind of gene therapy that you describe, like HIV and sickle cell, actually have their highest burden not in wealthier countries that might potentially be able to afford it, but in the developing world, in which the prices you cite are just way out of reach. What can you say about how these numbers compare in terms of diseases that might be susceptible to gene therapy in wealthier countries versus developing countries?
Yes, so let's take the example of sickle cell disease, which is highly prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa. And currently in the US, there are two approved products for the treatment of sickle cell disease. One costs $3.1 million, and the other one costs, I think, $2.2 million, if I remember correctly. Certainly, that is not affordable anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa. And yet the highest prevalence for sickle cell is right there. So that is a real problem in terms of affordability and access.
And is HIV as well potentially a use case for gene therapy?
Yes, in fact, it is. We have currently a clinical trial ongoing at UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, and UC Davis, whereby we have developed a CAR T cell therapy for the treatment of HIV. It is in clinical development. It's still early stages yet, but certainly CAR T and gene therapy can be used for the treatment of infectious diseases and specifically in this case, HIV. It is in development, though. It is not a product that is on the market, unlike sickle cell, where there are two products already approved by the FDA and on the market.
So, like sickle cell, HIV also has its highest burden in sub-Saharan Africa. So even when these clinical trials that you have underway are successful, are approved, you still face that huge challenge of delivering this kind of care at a acceptable cost and an approachable cost. So you alluded to this earlier, but how can these very advanced gene therapy technologies be used and deployed potentially at scale in the developing world in general and sub-Saharan Africa in particular?
There are two solutions. One is point of care manufacturing, where the products are manufactured at the hospitals where the patient comes for care. And this can actually, with simple and effective processes, reduce the cost by tenfold. But we need to do a little bit more in Africa. But that bridge can be met by using highly skilled local labor who can be trained and can be technically competent to produce these therapies at the hospitals where the patients come from care. But the other piece of this is also technology transfer, transferring the technology so that countries can actually make not only the final therapy, but also the components used to manufacture the therapy. And that can be quite transformative. So, for example, we have a collaboration with a nonprofit called Fiocruz in Brazil that is supported by the Brazilian Ministry of Health to transfer not only the CAR T manufacturing technology, but the other pieces like the vector manufacturing technology, so that they can produce all the components and the final products themselves locally so that they can be very cost effective, so they can be provided, in this case, to the Brazilian public health system for a low cost, and for the patients who are in that public health system for little and no cost at all.
So I wanted to maybe separate those two ways to reduce the costs and talk about them in a little more depth. So the first you mentioned was creating these processes, these systems at the point of care. The second is tech transfer, technology transfer. On the second point, so for example, you mentioned earlier that there are two approved processes for sickle cell. Presumably, like major pharmaceutical companies here in the United States are the ones, or maybe in Europe, are the ones that own this technology. Is there any effort underway to get them to release that technology to enable the result that you seek, which is the development of these technologies, the deployment of the technologies closer to where the burden is, which is sub-Saharan Africa?
For some of the products, there is intellectual property, but for some of the other products, either the intellectual property or is expired or it's already been in the public domain. Gene therapy has been around for quite a while. Actually, I started my career in the late 1980s here in the US. We were at the very early stages then, but there's been a lot of information in the public domain that allows organizations like Caring Cross to actually create a freedom to operate position to produce these products without any impedance by any IP. Products that are improved, they may not be highly novel, but they certainly have their therapeutic effects. So that's where we're focused on in terms of the intellectual property, finding a freedom to operate position where these products can be manufactured and then tech transferred to countries so they can manufacture them without any impedance.
So it's really just like central to your operating model.
Correct. That's central to our operating model. But others who want to gain access into the space, they use that freedom to operate to then develop their own novelty to their own products.
So, for example, like if and when this HIV trial goes well, you would transfer that technology more or less free of charge, right?
We will transfer the technology under a collaborative partnership agreement so that it's both affordable and sustainable by all stakeholders. Our goal is access to patients, but I think models can be created where all stakeholders can create their own sustainability models through that collaboration.
So, the other half of the solution you identified is localizing the process of creating these therapies. Can you describe in more detail how you foresee that working?
So it's primarily in collaboration with hospitals that have the capability of manufacturing these products. For example, bone marrow transplantation has been performed at hospitals for decades quite successfully. And many hospitals that perform these kind of procedures have the capabilities to make, for example, CAR T cells. Our approach is twofold. One is to reduce the cost of all the individual unit processes and components used to manufacture the product. So, for example, the single biggest cost is the vector itself. So, out of Caring Cross, we spun out a company called Vectra Biomed, a public benefit corporation that is a for-profit company, yet makes vectors for anyone at a substantially reduced cost compared to the industry norm. So in that way, we're trying to reduce the cost of the process. The second point is enabling the clinical centers to manufacture the products in a kind of a clean room environment. Now, some hospitals have these GMP clean rooms that they can utilize to manufacture these products, others don't. So we have partnered with a company called Germ Free, they're located in Florida, that makes mobile clean room units in which they're modular in construction. They're about the size of a shipping container, and they can be deployed anywhere in the world. And when we deploy them, not only the clean room is there, but all the instrumentation is packed within these units so that when they are deployed, they can basically be very easily assembled and all the equipment can be tested and ready for GMP production of the specific products. So that's the kind of multiple ways we're trying to tackle this.
And have these mobile clean rooms been deployed anywhere yet?
Not specifically ours. They're being built right now under our collaboration with the Fiocruz and the Brazilian Ministry of Health. But the clean rooms have been deployed all over the world in the past, these kind of clean rooms. So this is something that is routine and has been done before. But our specific units are now being manufactured.
How do we bridge the gap that currently exists? You have these solutions that you've identified. What will it take to actually deploy these solutions? Is it funding? Are you seeking to raise external money? Is it a degree of political will? What's needed to get from point A to point B?
It's a combination of what you have stated. It's partnerships. It's all about creating partnerships with organizations that want to work with us to help us with this vision. So that vision is being actuated with our Brazilian collaboration. The Brazilian Ministry of Health provided funding to support this collaboration, where we're technology transferring and building mobile units so that Fiocruz can then manufacture these products locally in Brazil for low cost to the public. So this is the model that we're using and a blueprint of how this collaboration could work all over the world.
What comes next for Caring Cross in terms of deploying these ideas? Do you have any upcoming key decisions or inflection points that will suggest to you that indeed you are making progress on reducing the costs of these advanced therapies in the developing world?
We have a number of candidates in development for leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma, HIV, sickle cell disease, and running the clinical trials and showing safety and efficacy. That's the number one priority. And then deployment and collaboration with a number of partners, not just in Brazil, but in other parts of the world, showing that we can successfully tech transfer, deploy, and showing that the cost equation is beneficial for the local population, that these products can be in fact manufactured in an affordable and sustainable way so that those patients that desperately need these therapies can get access to them. Those are the kind of the next steps. It's very straightforward. Obviously, funding is needed for that. Political will is needed for that. Partnerships with various organizations in those countries is also needed. So we're working on all these aspects.
Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
I'll be in New York for the Social Innovation Summit on September 23rd and for the DevX Summit on September 24th and 25th. And I'd love to be able to chat with people that are interested in our vision. So please reach out.
Boro, thank you so much. This was interesting. I always like having kind of solutions-focused conversations on some of these big global health challenges. So thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening to Global Dispatches. The show is produced by me, Mark Leon Goldberg. It is edited and mixed by Levi Sharp. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the show and enable automatic downloads to get new episodes as soon as they're released. On Spotify, tap the bell icon to get a notification when we publish new episodes. And of course, please visit globaldispatches.org to get on our free mailing list, get in touch with me, and access our full archive. Thank you.